morning, saints of God, and welcome to Wake Up with First Service. I am your host, Minister Morris. In our program this morning, we'll finish examining the negative reports and the repercussions because of these reports that was given by the 10 spies who were without faith and the end result that came from it. So we're going to see what was the result of these bad reports, of this negative report that was given by the 10 spies. So let's get up to speed. So the first thing we have is that the spies returned with a negative report of the promised land. We saw that Caleb then rebuked that report, proclaiming in faith that they can take the land that the Lord had promised them. We also seen that the people became angry because of the report, and they turned their anger and their frustration towards Aaron and Moses, but more so against Caleb and Joshua. So our lesson picks up as the people are in their feelings over the bad news given by the 10 unbelieving spies. So in our lesson this morning, we're going to be in Numbers 14. We're going to go through verses 1 through 12. And our lesson is entitled Rebellion of the People. So we see that everything is not going as planned. Everything is not going well. The spies came back with evidence that the land is prosperous, but because of their fear, because of their apprehension, they give this negative report to kind of turn the people away from wanting to go into the promised land. So we see that this report came at a cost, and it came at a cost of the people now being angry with Caleb, now being angry with Joshua, now being angry more so with Aaron and Moses. So we're going to see in our very first section the despair of the Israelites, and basically they feel lost now. They feel like they have no hope. But let's look at verses 1 and 2 first, and we're going to see how the people are mourning and murmuring. So they're downtrodden, they're depressed now because of the bad news that came with this report. So let's look at Numbers 14. Let's look at verses 1 and 2 and see just how down these people are because of this report. Chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron and the whole congregation, and said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in the wilderness? So what we see here is that the bad news of this report has spread throughout the camp, and it's spread very quickly. This negative report has now caused the congregation to lift their voices up and cry and weep all that night. And this crying and weeping was like a quiet crying and weeping. This was a loud wailing and screaming. And this was basically the people showing their fear as well as their disappointment with the situation at hand. So just imagine thousands and thousands of people crying and wailing out loud to the point where that's all you hear. And this is all because of the news that the spies brought back. And what this shows is that the people had forgot all about what the Lord had done for them. They forgot all about the water from the rock. They forgot all about the daily manna and the quail, the parting of the Red Sea, and all the plagues that God had did on behalf of the people. So the people now are wailing and mourning and weeping as if God can't deliver them, as if God is powerless in this situation. What we see here is that the people are magnifying. They're building up and they're magnifying the problems, and they're forgetting about the Lord's power as well as his grace. See, God can do what he wants when he wants, and the people who believe in him, such as these Israelites, need to understand that. They need to know all is not lost as long as they got God on their side. Now, in verse 2, we see that the people have once again, they're starting to pick up this complaining spirit again. And over these past few lessons, we've seen this complaining spirit is what has got them in this problem in the first place. So what they're doing is they're wailing and they're weeping over this negative report, And they now turn their grumbling and complaining towards Moses and Aaron, believing it was their fault for leading them into this impossible situation. See, they forgot all about the times that Moses interceded on their behalf. So for them to become angry with Moses and grumble with him and just totally dismiss all the times that they fell to the wayside, and it was Moses who interceded. It was Moses who prayed to God on their behalf. So now for them to get so mad and angry at him without even looking at it from his point of view is very troubling for Moses, and it's going to be very troubling for the people. And to make matters worse, they then took the Lord's name in vain by using it in a lie, saying that, well, did God bring us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, or did God bring us out here just to kill us? And all they were doing was just adding to their own sins of rebellion as well as unbelief. See, they thought so little of their deliverance from Egypt that they spoke as if they wanted to die either in Egypt or either in the wilderness. And what they were doing, they were implying that they would rather die than to be slaughtered by the giants in Canaan, the land that the Lord had promised them. See, the people are now just totally giving up. They're totally just not even trying anymore. And the thing is that those that grumbled would receive their wish. As we'll see later on in this lesson, they will receive their wish for what they would wander in the desert until they died. So some of these people that were grumbling now will see what they were grumbling about. They spoke it into existence that, what did God and did Aaron and Moses, did you bring us out of Egypt into the wilderness for us just to die? So the question is, was this punishment just because they were scared to go into Canaan? Would the punishment that we are going to see at the end of this lesson, was it just because of the report and that the report scared them? Well, the answer is no. It's not solely because of the report the spies gave. It was also what came after the report. It's the reaction to the report is what really got the children of Israel in this mess. For one, they grumble against the Lord based on this report. Even though God had promised them, I'm going to give you this land, all you have to do is go take it. The second thing is that they denied the Lord's promises, which means they didn't believe in what God said anymore. This report by man changed the promises, changed their faith in the promises of God. So they denied the Lord's promise. They dismissed it as not going to happen based on what men said. And finally, we see they're disregarding his goodness. For God to bring them out of Egypt, to take them all this way, and then to not give them what he promised them is denying that he's good, that he brought them out there for evil means, that he's not going to let them get into the promised land because he's not a nice, not a kind, not a generous or merciful God. So we see that they're in punishment is not just because they're scared and not just because they believe the report. It's what came after they heard the report. And all these things were coming against the Lord himself. So what we're seeing here in these first two verses is that the children of Israel are looking for a person to point the finger at other than themselves. They are looking for a reason, looking for a scapegoat, so to speak, as to why they're in the situation that they're in. Now, in our next section of scripture, the next two verses, we'll see in verse 3 and 4 that the people then desire, because of what's going on, they desire to go back to Egypt. Now, we've seen this once before when they got into hard times, they got into a rough spot. They start thinking back to Egypt. When we're talking about the manna and the quail, they start reminiscing back at the food they ate in Egypt. When they got to the Red Sea, before they even got here, when they got to the Red Sea and they had the army behind them and the Red Sea in front of them, they start thinking about, you know what, maybe we should have stayed in Egypt. So we see that this mindset is really deeply embedded in them. And the people now, once again, are desiring to go back to Egypt. So let's look at 3 and 4, verses 3 and 4, and see what this desire, how deep this desire to go back is really entrenched in the people. Let's look at verse 3 and 4. Verse 3. And wherefore has the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. So here we see that the people, they're so scared that they accuse the Lord of bringing them and bringing their wives and bringing their children to Canaan just to die. And this prompted the question, were it not better for us to return to Egypt? So based on how they're feeling, based on the situation they're in, they're now questioning, was it a good idea to come out here, and would we be better off going back to Egypt? Even though we'll go back in bondage, we will go back where we have food, we have water, we have a place to lay our head, and we can get out of this sticky situation. And what we see in 4 is that we see they follow up their rebellious question with an equally rebellious idea, and that is to pick someone to lead them back to Egypt, because they were they thought that the taking of Canaan was now impossible, all based on what man said, all based on what the spies said. So now they want to go back to Egypt, but now they want to pick a person that can lead them back into Egypt, back into bondage, back into Pharaoh's workforce, back to making brick without straw. So what we see that the children are doing now, we see their sin is now escalating, because they started out murmuring, and now they're going to all outright rebellion against the Lord, against Moses, and against Aaron, and against the good judgment of both Caleb and Joshua. Now we know that according to Nehemiah 9:17, the people did choose a captain. They did eventually choose an individual to lead them back to Egypt. So let's look at Nehemiah 9:17 and see just who or just how the people chose a captain to lead them back into bondage, back into Egypt. So let's look at Nehemiah 9:17 and see what it says about this captain. It says, and they refused to obey, neither were they mindful of thy wonders that they didst among them, but hardened their necks, and in their rebellion they appointed a captain to return to their bondage. But thou art a God ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and forsook them not. So we see they did choose a captain. This is according to Nehemiah. Nehemiah is using this as a reference, and they did choose a captain to lead them back. But here's the thing: at the end of that verse, it said God still did not forsake them, because he's merciful, because he's gracious, because he's kind. And even though they went and chose a man to take them back into a situation that the Lord had delivered them from, God still did not turn his back on them, and God was still with them. So we see that even the people, as wishy-washy as they are, as up and down as they are, as hot and cold as they are, God still kept them. He still stuck with them. He still had their back. He was still by their side. And this is a testament to how great, how good, and how gracious our God really is. Now, in verses 5 through 10, in our next section, we're going to see the plea of Caleb. We're going to see the plea of Joshua. And in verse 5 specifically, starting out this next section, we're going to see Aaron and Moses' response to what he just heard, what was just done, talking about, let's go back to Egypt. Let's pick another captain. Why has you and Aaron brought us out here? Why has God brought us out here to die? And not only us, but our wives and our children. So this is a lot for Aaron and Moses to take in. So let's see what their response is to all this negativity based on this negative report. So let's look at verse 5, chapter 14 of Numbers. Verse 5. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. Not the response we thought we might hear. Most people in this day and age, upon hearing all this criticism and all this critiquing and all this finger pointing, would probably come back with things of similar nature, name calling, saying this and saying that, bringing up all that they've done on behalf of the people. But what we see here is why God chose Moses and Aaron in the first place. And so instead of coming back with all these mean words and all this tearing each other down with all this negative rhetoric, Aaron and Moses does the simple thing and they just bow down. See, the fact that the people were seriously entertaining this idea of returning to Egypt, all it did was show Moses and Aaron that they not only wanted to return, but they wanted to return to Egypt into bondage under a new leader. So the same people that brought them out of Egypt, the people of Israel didn't want them to take them back. And this is namely Moses and Aaron. So what the people wanted, let's pick somebody else to take us back into bondage. We don't want to deal with Moses or Aaron because look at what they've done now. And this mentality, this attitude, this caused Aaron and Moses to fall on their faces in front of the entire congregation. And it was now crystal clear that the people were filled with unbelief and were contemplating rebellious actions. So the question is, why did Aaron and Moses fall before the congregation? Why didn't they stand up for themselves? Why didn't they bring up all they done for the people? Why did they do what they just did? And that was an act of meekness, an act of humility. Why did they react in such a way? Well, the first thing was they were astonished and amazed by the people. They were astonished and amazed at the fact that they were so quick to throw in the towel and to give up all the progress they had made. Had it been easy? No. Had it been a nice walk in the wilderness? No, it has not been easy. It has not been a journey that could be taken lightly. But still, God was with them. They only got this far because God had kept them. And Moses is so amazed that you're so quick to throw in the towel when we got a gracious and good God backing us and supporting us. It showed the great desire for the people to stop murmuring and stop being rebellious. So what they did was show this act of meekness, this act of humility in hopes that it would stop the murmurings of the people, stop their attitude of rebellion and get them back on track. See, a lot of times when negativity is coming to us, arguments and argumentative spirit and finger pointing and people have this negative attitude, if we reply with that same negative attitude, all it does is escalate the problem. So somebody has to de-escalate the problem, and to de-escalate it is for one to step back and be humble, be meek, and to be quiet. And this is what Aaron and Moses are doing. They're not trying to make the problem worse by trying to defend themselves with words and with actions, what they've done, what they're doing, and what they did. All they're doing is showing the people that we need a moment of peace. We need a moment to think, and we need a moment to really think about what we're doing here. And this is what they're trying to encourage through this action of this being prostrate before them and just humbling themselves before the people. Now, in verse 6, we've seen now Moses and Aaron are trying to stop this rebellion. They're trying to calm everybody down. But now let's switch and let's look at what Caleb and Joshua are going through. Now, mind you, Caleb is the one that believed the report. Caleb is the one that spoke out that we can still take the land in spite of what these 10 spies are saying. And what he says, now Joshua is agreeing with it, that God did promise us this, and God is going to make a way that we can take possession of this land. So now the people not only are mad at Aaron and Moses, they're mad at Caleb and Joshua because you keep talking about what God is going to do and what God is going to make ways and how God is going to usher us into this land. But look at what the report said. If God was really going to do that, would there be giants? Would there be fortified cities? Would there be all these people and all these different clans and tribes in there if God really wanted us to take the land? So we see in verse 6, we're going to see the grief of Joshua and Caleb because they believed the report that God gave instead of the report that man gave. So let's look at verse 6 and look at this grief of Joshua and Caleb. Verse 6. And he said, "Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known verse 6. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, they rent their clothes. So Aaron and Moses were not alone in their shock and grief, because now Caleb and Joshua, they are showing their grief and they are showing their shock by tearing their clothes, which in these times are called renting. Now, the renting or tearing of one's clothes is found frequently in Scripture. For example, Joshua rent his clothes when he found out Achan had forbidden treasure buried under his tent, even though God said, don't take nothing, don't touch nothing. Joshua, when he found out about this act, he rent his clothes. He was angry, he was mad, he was disappointed in what had happened. We see another example when Jephthah, he rent his clothes after he made a vow unto the Lord that if the Lord gave him the victory in this battle and he won, when he gets back to his town, back to his city, that whatever came out of his house, he would offer it to the Lord as a burnt offering. Needless to say, when he arrived back home, his own daughter came out the house. And Jephthah had to keep his promise. Jephthah had to keep his vow. But Jephthah also rent his clothes in disbelief and anger because he spoke too quickly about what he was going to do for the Lord and didn't really think things through. So we see that the rending of the clothes is an outward expression of sadness, of anger, of disappointment. It's just an outward expression. And we see that what was going on here, it meant that the people would have to rent their clothes because they were mad, they were angry, they were disappointed. They just didn't understand what was really going on and what God had promised. But Caleb and Joshua did. They understood that whatever the Lord said, whatever he promised, that's what the Lord was going to do. But the fact that the people were so angry with them for believing the Lord's promise over the spies' report, that they wanted to get rid of them also. So we see that Aaron and Moses are not the only two catching a lot of flack for this. We also see Caleb and Joshua are catching just as much flack for believing the promises of God and not the report of the 10 spies. Now, in verses 7 through 9, we're going to see the admonition of Joshua and Caleb. We're going to see what happens after the people now voice their concerns, voice their displeasure at the fact that these two still want to go into this land in spite of what the report said, in spite of all the negativity that the 10 spies heaped upon this report. You two still want to go into this land. So now we're going to see what happens because of this believing in God's promises over man's report. So let's look at verses 7 through 9 and see the admonition of Caleb as well as Joshua. Verse 7. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord delight us, then he will bring us into this land and give it us a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. So what we see here is that Joshua and Caleb were willing to take the unpopular stand against the 10 spies report, and they tried to reason with the people. They tried to encourage the people. They advocated doing what the Lord had commanded. See, the 10 spies, they focused on the negative and what Israel was incapable of doing. They also misrepresented and exaggerated the facts, while Caleb and Joshua focused on the positives and all that was true. See, Caleb and Joshua told the people that the land was exceedingly good, that it was an exceedingly good land, which was to encourage the people to not pass up a good thing and to go back to Egypt. And we see in verse 8 that Joshua and Caleb also state that they are convinced that if the people had faith in the Lord, which would delight him and please him, he would enable them to successfully enter the promised land as well as take possession of it. But see, the people had to have faith. And this is what would delight the Lord and want him to be with the people even more and to make them successfully be able to take possession of this land. See, Caleb and Joshua believed the Lord would bless his people with land that was both fertile and prosperous. See, again, God has made a way for the people. All you have to do is go take this land. You don't have to fight. You won't have to fuss. You don't have to worry. Go in, possess the land. And this land is not a bad land. It's a fertile land. It's a prosperous land. It's a land that's going to benefit you and your generations to come. This is the plan of the Lord, to bring them in this land, flowing in milk and honey, a land that will do them good, do their kids good, be good to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, and so on and so forth. This is the type of God that they are serving, and this is the type of God that we are serving today. God has made a promise to be with us, to never leave us and to never forsake us in any land, any possession that he gives us, any gifts of the Spirit, any gifts that come from his grace and his mercy, whether it's a blessing, whether it's a healing, whether it's an anointing, whether it's knowledge and wisdom, whatever God gives to us is going to be fertile as well as prosperous. So we see that nothing has changed with the Lord. He's still the same today. He's still the same right now, and he will still be the same in future time and days and years to come. This is what Caleb and Joshua was trying to get over to the people. Believe in God. Believe in his promises, and not so much in what man has to say. And then verse 9, Caleb and Joshua urged the people. What they do is first they urge the people to do some things. And the first thing they urge them to do is to not to be disloyal to the Lord. God has been with us thus far. God has brought us this far. God has protected us and kept us this far. Why should we turn our back on him now? They also urge the people not to be rebellious and to go against the Lord's command. He is God. He is God alone. We are only standing and breathing. We only have breath in our body to speak and rebel now because of the Lord. We are only standing up here right now because of the Lord. And it is not because of any other outside source. It is all because of the Lord. And finally, they urge them not to fear the people of Canaan. Not to fear them because God has already won the battle. God has already fought the war. God has already cleared the path. All the people of Israel have to do is go in and take the land. Why are you scared of a people? Why are you concerned about a problem that has already been solved? Why are you scared of a people that have already been beaten? Why are you so scared to step forward on this path to a fertile and prosperous land because of who's already there? Because God is more with you. God is with them. So why should they fear? God has blessed them. So why should they fear? And God is keeping them. So why should they fear? And we also see that Caleb and Joshua then, after urging the people not to be disloyal, not to be rebellious, not to be fearful, they encouraged the people. They encouraged the people that the people in Canaan are going to be like food to them. We're going to just devour them up, which means look how easy it's going to be for us to go and possess the land that God has promised. They also encouraged the people that the enemy was exposed and defenseless. They're out in the open. They have nowhere to hide, and they have no defense against us. Why? Because we're not coming by ourselves. We're coming with a mighty God. And they finally encouraged them that the enemy is without protection because the Lord was with his people. See, the Lord makes a difference. It makes a difference when the Lord is on our side. It makes a difference when God is going to bat for us, going before us, clearing away stumbling blocks, clearing away the enemy. See, this is what made the children of Israel so formidable. It wasn't their weapons, it wasn't their might, it wasn't their leadership, or it wasn't their power. It was the fact that God was with the children of Israel, that God was leading the children of Israel, and that God was protecting the children of Israel. This is the sole reason why the children of Israel should not have any cares or concerns in the world about going to take what God has already given them. So what we've seen now is that Caleb and Joshua are really trying to encourage the people. They're trying to motivate them. They're trying to get them out this negative mindset. And the thing is, this report has really done some damage. so much so that Aaron and Moses have their own problems and they can't really address these things. But now Caleb and Joshua are stepping up and showing why they are going to be the ones to usher this next generation into the promised land. They're already showing leadership qualities and they're already being tested by what they're going through, the circumstances and their environment, to prove to God that these are the two men worthy and capable of leading the children of Israel into the promised land. Let's go down to verse 10. In verse 10, we're going to see the angry response of the people. Now, the people have heard all these encouraging words. They've heard all these urgings of not to be disloyal, stay on the Lord's side. But let's look at the angry response of the people just to show you how deep and how entrenched this negative report has really gotten into the spirits of these people. So let's look at verse 10 and see this angry response. Verse 10. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. So we see that this is the angry response of the people. So despite all of the encouraging words from Caleb and Joshua, the people still trusted and believed the negative report that the 10 spies brung. This leads the whole congregation to threaten to now stone Caleb and Joshua. They was just encouraging them. They was just urging them. They was just trying to build them up. And now the people want to stone them. And here's the thing. It said the whole congregation, which means, sadly, that nobody, in these thousands and thousands of people, nobody agreed with Caleb and Joshua. But as these threats were manifesting themselves, so was the Lord's presence. And not just because of what the people were saying, but because they were now threatening Caleb and Joshua and possibly Aaron and Moses, threatening them with a physical harm. Thus, the Lord's glory will appear immediately. And we see this just proves the point that we see later on in Scripture in 1 Chronicles 16:22 that says, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. So we see that it's one thing to speak against the people God has entrusted leadership with. It's one thing to speak against the Lord's children. It's one thing to speak against a child, a man or woman of God. But it's all another different thing to now want to impose physical harm on it. Now the Lord has to manifest himself and to put a stop to this. And we'll see this in verse 11, where the Lord's questions, he's asking questions now to try to get the people's minds drawn in to see just where they are stepping out of bounds. So let's look at verse 11 and see the Lord's questions that he's going to ask Moses. Verse 11. The Lord said unto Moses, how long will this people provoke me? And how long will it be are they believe me for all the signs which I have showed among them? So what we see here is now God is now speaking to Moses. He saw all this interaction between the people and Aaron and Moses. He's seen the interaction between Joshua and Caleb and the people, and how Joshua and Caleb try to encourage the people, how Aaron and Moses try to humble themselves before the people, and none of these things work. So now the Lord is going to come to Moses and ask Moses some things because this is now getting out of hand, and now the people need to be stopped. So what we see here is that the leaders were not the only ones frustrated and grieved with the people. God was also. And as a result, he posed two questions directly to Moses. He didn't run them through Aaron. He didn't speak any other way. He spoke to Moses like a man, directly and promptly. And this is what he asked. He said, how long will the people provoke me? And how long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I have showed among them? So God's point was this, is that the miracles should have been enough to convince them to trust and believe in him. The miracles, all the way up until this point, everything God has done for them should have been a testimony to how God can keep them and how God will keep them. So the question is, what were the miracles up until this point that should have, without a shadow of a doubt, proved to the people that God is a keeper and a way maker? Well, let's look at that 6 miracles that took place from the time they decided to leave up until this point now. And we see that God killed the firstborn in Exodus 12. He had the pillar of cloud and fire in Exodus 13. We've seen the parting of the Red Sea in Exodus 14. We've seen God make the bitter waters make them sweet in Exodus 15. And we see him send the manna, then the quail in Exodus 16. And then finally in Exodus 17, we see that God allowed Moses to bring water from a rock. So all these miracles, all throughout the Exodus, should have proved to the people, again, without a shadow of a doubt, that God can keep them, that God can bless them, that God can deliver them into this promised land. And the thing is that all these miracles was to just encourage the people to believe in God just that much more. So let's close out in our final verse, verse 12. We've seen Caleb and Joshua try to reason. We've seen Aaron and Moses try to reason through humility. And now God has got to step in and God has got to pass judgment because the people just don't want to listen. So let's look at verse 12 and see what the Lord's pronounced judgment upon this people is. So let's look at verse 12. It says, I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of thee a greater nation, mightier than they. So the Lord is now so fed up that he's considering destroying the people. He told Moses he would use a plague to destroy them. And with that same pestilence, he would completely blot out their name and blot out their race. And they would no longer be his people, which means he would disinherit them. And that he will make a greater nation, a mightier nation from the family of Moses, preserving the covenant he made with Abraham. So he said this once before with the children of Israel when they had that issue with the golden calf. God was ready to destroy them and to use Moses and his family to repopulate the nation, to make a better nation, a more sound nation. So we see this is not the first time God has threatened to do this and to do this to the people. Now, we do know that Moses would once again have to intercede for the people, and God would grant his request of a pardon for them. But as for the unbelieving people, their fate will still be sealed. They won't be completely blotted out, but they will be doomed to wander the desert for 40 years until that unbelieving generation died off. This would leave the two who believed the report of the Lord, the promise of the Lord. This would leave Caleb and Joshua and all those Israelites 20 years older and younger to eventually enter into the promised land. So he didn't destroy them right then and now. He didn't destroy them forever. But what he did was he let them wander in the desert, in the wilderness, until that generation, that unbelieving, stiff-necked generation died off. So now he can bring this new generation who only knows the grace and goodness of God and with new leadership who really believed in the promises of the Lord. So what we've seen today, we've seen Joshua and Caleb did not bring an evil report because they believed in God and his will for Israel. And because of their faith, they were the first generation to enter into the promised land. See, God is faithful to those who are faithful to him. So what have we seen today? Well, we've seen God's plans are the best plans. God's plan was to take the land. The spies' plan was, let's not go, let's stay here. And the people's plan was, let's go back to Egypt. So we see out of all three of these plans, the only plan that worked, the only plan that was promised was the plan of God. So that plan is the plan that you and I should follow, that we should work with, and that we should wholeheartedly believe in, because that's the plan that's really going to work. We've also seen that negativity and fear go hand in hand. See, the spies were overly negative because of their fear, and the people reacted because of their fear that was caused by the negative report. So we see that the negativity and the fear goes hand in hand. The negative report was brung up because of the fear of the spies. And the overreaction by the people was because of the fear that was generated by this negative report. So we see they both go hand in hand. So to keep that negativity and fear from coming into our lives, we got to be positive. We got to think positive things. We got to not be fearful, because we, as the children of Israel, have the Lord on our side. And we've seen that the faith in the Lord, it means moving forward. It means trusting in his plan. It means trusting his promises. And if we trust in his plan and if we trust in his promises, moving forward should be an easy thing for you and I, because we know that God is a keeper of us, of his word, and of his promises. So what have we learned? Well, we learned that the words of faith arouse anger in those who don't believe. See, the people were angry at Caleb and Joshua because they had a lack of faith. And the people were angry because Caleb and Joshua had the faith to believe in the promises of the Lord. So sometimes our faith and our belief in our faith, our strong belief in our faith, our strong outward showing of our faith will rub those without faith the wrong way. But let that not deter you and I from being faithful, being believers in God. Because if we show that we believe, if we show that we have faith, if we truly do these things, then hopefully it will rub off on somebody else and they will get curious. Why do you believe so much? And why do you have so much faith? And that gives us a moment that we can testify to the goodness of God. We've also learned that God's patience does have a limit. He will only put up with so much foolishness before he has to step in. We've seen now throughout this whole story, going all the way back to when they was complaining about the manner God has put up with all these little issues. And now here we see that when they talking about physically hurting the saints of God, that God now steps in and God passes this judgment. You will wander 40 years in the wilderness until you unbelieving generation die off, and this new generation with new leadership can take these people into the promised land. So God's patience does have a limit, and let you and I not try to find what that limit is. And finally, we've learned that we need to focus on God's power, not our problems. That's the issue. We focus too much on the problems, what we don't have, what we don't got, what we need, what we're in need of. Let's focus more on what God can provide. That God can provide our needs, God can fill our baskets, that God can fill our cupboards, God can make a way out of no way. Let's focus more on what God can't do, what God can do, rather than what we can't do. Let's focus on what God can provide, rather than what we are in need of. Because if we focus more on the power of the grace and the mercy of God, if we focus more on his goodness, of his graciousness, and of his willingness to want to help the saints, to bless the saints, to heal the saints, to make a better way for the saints. If we focus more on God and what he can do, instead of our current situation and what we're in need of and what we're lacking and how we can't get it, if we focus more on him, he'll focus more on us and he'll bless us. He will guide us. He will make a joyful noise, and we'll make a joyful noise when God steps in and turn these things around. So let us continue to believe in our God, in his promises, in his word, because God is true, God is faithful, and God is always on time. So that's all the time that we have for our program this morning. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, I encourage you to tune in to the 11 o'clock hour for the hour of power, where our leaders of the gospel are going to give us a word that keeps us depending on the Lord and not believing the negative reports of this world. So on behalf of Miracle Corner, I have been your host today, Minister Morris. And as always, be safe, be encouraged, be blessed. Until we meet again.